Hello everyone, I'm Fabio Gritti, and I will talk about Confusum Contractum, a system we built in order to find confused deputy vulnerabilities in the Ethereum smart contract ecosystem. So in the past 2 years, like nearly $2 billion have been stolen from blockchain application. And if you've been reading like Web3 security news, you're probably familiar with these headlines. There is quite a bit of drama in the space, like millions are being stolen like basically every week. And specifically, this money are stolen from DeFi, which has been like mentioned multiple times during the session, and it's basically like a conglomerate of financial products that are like running on the blockchain. So you have like protocol for investments, lending, credit, insurance, and so on and so forth. And under the hood, this DeFi is powered by smart contracts. We have been talking about it. And like briefly, the smart contracts are like this program that are running on top of a virtual machine. In Ethereum, they run on top of the EVM, it's called, and they implement the business logic of an application. Every smart contract is associated with like a unique address and exposes a set of public functions that are implementing that business logic. Users can interact with a smart contract by sending transactions, and they are also associated with a unique address. When they send a transaction, like the transaction metadata, like there are many metadata, and some of them are like from whom the transaction is being sent. So in this case, the address of the user, and a thing called call data. The call data is divided in two parts. The first part is like 4 bytes, and is like basically the function ID of the function you want to execute in the smart contract. And the rest is just a byte string you give to the function with the data, the input data for the function itself. So in this case, you, for example, execute the function f1 with the string hello world. So now when the function executes, there are like a bunch of opcodes executing, and sometimes there is this special opcode called call, and this opcode is generating an internal transaction that is not directed within the contract itself, so none of those other functions, but to another function in another contract. And then when this other contract receives the internal transaction, iteratively, it can call another contract, and so on and so forth, creating like a very, like, the rabbit hole can be very, very deep. And within this connection, sometimes like bugs are like hidden, and this can create security vulnerabilities, of course. So let me spend a few words about this like bug class and the confused deputy bug class. Specifically, this bug class was introduced by Norman Hardy in like 1988. It's quite an old paper. And it's a privilege escalation vulnerability. And imagine like you have 2 programs, P1 and P2. And there is no relationship of trust between these 2 programs. So if P1 asks for an action to be executed from P2, of course P2 is going to reject to execute that action. However, if we introduce a trusted middleman called P3, and there is a trusting relationship between P3 and P2, it might be possible for P1 to trick P3 to perform the action on its behalf. So in this case, P1 elevated its privileges to execute that action against P2. So now we will label like these 3 programs as the attacker for P1, the confused deputy for P3, and the target for P2. So in this paper, we remap this bug class, but in the context of the blockchain, and specifically, we call it a confused contract instead of the confused deputy. And P1 is going to become our attacker. P3 is going to become from the confused deputy to the confused contract. And P2 is going to become the contract target. So now you may wonder, what does a privilege escalation look like on chain? So the connection between the contracts is a transaction, of course. And the first transaction being sent by an attacker is generally like a transaction with some data directed to a specific function of the contract C1. And the metadata inside this transaction are like 2, the most important we should focus on, like origin and message sender. Origin is just saying like who is the originator of the first transaction. And message sender is representing the caller of the function in the target contract. So in this case, it's quite boring. They're the same because the first transaction always has this value like the same. But notice how when the contract C1 executes the opcode call, the internal transaction generated propagates the message sender like information in that like metadata value. So as you can see, message sender like has the value C1, which is the address of the contract, the middleman, the contract C1. So you may wonder why this is important, because C2 and many contracts actually, they're using this information to perform different kinds of operations, such as checking if the message sender is a specific address, then they unlock some functionalities, or they just transfer money from the message sender account to a destination that can be chosen from the attacker, and so on and so forth. And this is totally fine. This is how the application on the chain, they actually work. They use message sender in these ways. However, the problem is if C1 allows everyone to execute a call, then an attacker can borrow, borrow the identity for privilege escalation in other contracts. So yeah, as an instance, the attacker might be able to execute that transfer function by setting the attacker as the receiving account of the transfer operation. So in order to identify confused contract vulnerabilities at scale, we need a few ingredients. And the first one is finding a confused contract, so a contract with an open call that an attacker can manipulate. Second, a contract target that has some sort of relationship with the confused contract. And this relationship can be I don't know, some authentication relationship, or even just a state that is being held on behalf of the confused contract. And finally, we should be able to generate a transaction, to put the right call data to generate a transaction that hits the function F1 with the open call and generate this internal transaction to finish the chain of the attack. So first question is, how do you find confused contract? So we take a smart contract, and specifically, we work with binaries, and we use the compilation framework GigaHorse. It's quite an amazing work. And we identify all the public function exposed by the contract, and we isolate the one that contains a call. At that point, we perform this analysis that we call the call inspection. And this is, I try to compact it in this slide. It's quite complicated, so please check out the paper if you want to know more. But very briefly, we perform directed symbolic execution to understand if a call instruction is reachable by an attacker. And if it's reachable, we check if an attacker can control the destination of the call. If yes, we found a confused contract. Then the second step, we need to find targets. It's not just we cannot just find open call. We need to know how to use those calls to exploit some interesting state. So yeah, how to find a contract target? Sometimes it's not easy because there can be millions of other contracts where our confused contract holds some sort of state. So that can be that guy over there, or these other contract over there. And sometimes we don't even know which action we want to run against these targets. So in the paper, we suggest a couple of strategies to find contract targets. And here I want to just go briefly over one of those. And specifically, we observe that an instance of a contract target might be an ERC20 token contract. And these contracts are contracts that are holding cryptocurrencies on behalf of other users. And you can execute function like transfer, so transferring money from an user to cryptocurrency from an user to another user, or withdrawing your money, and so on and so forth. So it turns out that, yeah, this ERC20 contract, they hold this state on behalf of other contract, which is their token balance in that specific contract. And this state is also automatically identifiable. And I don't have time here to explain how we identify this state, but please check out the paper for more details. So the full exploit against this kind of contract will look like this. So an attacker identifies a confused contract with an open call. So he crafts a transaction, send the first transaction to the confused contract, hit the function F1 that executes the call. The call is creating this internal transaction that propagates the value of the message sender. And now the ERC20 contract is going to execute a transfer from the message sender to the value set by the attacker. So basically draining all the account balance of that specific confused contract. So in our evaluation, we tested more than 2 million smart contracts deployed between December 2020 and December 2022. And we found out 529 potential confused contracts. 84 of them we were able to pair with a contract target. And in our evaluation, we were able to automatically generate exploits for a total value of more than $1 million, which is quite interesting, consider the span we consider and the amount of contracts we consider. So this is a very good results. Before concluding, I want to underline that. So in the paper, we just scratched the surface of what's out there, the kind of possibilities one can have to exploit this bug class. But we believe that there can be way more ways to exploit this kind of vulnerabilities. And as a community, I believe we need more tools to understand all the complex relationships that are between all these contracts, and like there are thousands of contracts every day interact among each other, and it's very difficult sometimes to find like the right tool to investigate those relationships. So to conclude, a confused contract is a class of vulnerability inspired by the confused deputy bug class, but applied in the context of the blockchain, and the attackers can borrow the identity of another contract to perform actions on their behalf. And in our evaluation, we estimated more than $1 million of possible financial damage. That being said, that concludes my talk. Thank you so much, and I'm ready to take questions.